All power to the people, that's how we proceed. We know they won't give, so we take what we need. All power to the people, we work, we struggle. With the backbone, the brains, and the muscle. Fuck that abstract shit, look around. We got power in our numbers, the politics are crowds. Cause you're more than an individual. And when we get together, it is more than a ritual. To pick away at your wage like a vulture. That's why we need a revolution in our culture. If you spray what we say on the walls, this goes out to you when your tag stands tall. As long as you get involved, all artists for the cause. Hear the people's call. We start at the root, then we bloom. A flower in the concrete that said that it was doomed. So we will reclaim it, the people's reign like a monsoon. In order to survive, we must defy the tomb that tried to divide, conquer from inside. Threading the needle with a needless compromise. Make me see red, that's the blood in my eye. We are under siege behind enemy lines, so get organized. The motive's the political line. We take what works, the rest is left behind. All power to the people, that's how we proceed. We know they won't give, so we take what we need. All power to the people, we work, we struggle. With the backbone, the brains, and the muscle. All power to the people, gonna take back the...
Yeah. Last stream.
Hello.
2024. We're here. This is crazy. Jay, how you feeling? Last stream of the year, baby.
I'm glad to be back here, and that intro video just really gets me hyped. I really love it. It kind of like zones me in and focuses me. So I'm ready. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling good. No, me too. I'm jamming to it every time, and it's with the visuals, just all came together real nice. And this is the last stream of 2024, so we're going to be in a reflective mood, but there's many things that we can reflect on by the end of the year, getting geared up for the new year. And what better way to close out a year and launch it into the new year but to talk about revisionism of all kinds, small revisionisms, big revisionisms, long-standing revisionisms, new revisionisms, all to defend the science of Marxism. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We have had a really good last couple of months of different live streams, talking about all different kinds of topics. But today won't just be talking about the topic of revisionism. It'll be really talking about it in connection with the science of Marxism. And that's because we have an incredibly exciting announcement, which is the relaunch. Can I call it that, Jay? The relaunch of Politics in Command?
I think it's a relaunch, and it's also a new season.
New season, relaunch, we're doing it all. So tomorrow you've got a new episode coming out, right?
Yeah, let me talk on that. Thank you for bringing that up. So tomorrow, Polycom, or Politics in Command podcast, will be launching a new episode. It is the first episode of season 3. It is somewhat of a comeback because I have not published an episode in a very, very long time. So for those who do listen to the podcast, I apologize for that. But I will say we are going to be starting off the year very strong, have a whole lineup of episodes. And tomorrow will be the first episode of a mini-series, at least as of now, a 4-part mini-series. It could develop into a 5-part mini-series, laying the foundations of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. Of course, it's hard to talk about everything that's happened in the past 180 years, but we're going to lay some concrete foundations to build upon going on throughout the rest of the year. Tomorrow's episode is going to be very exciting. It is going to be an episode titled Understanding Science and Marxism. And the quick basic idea is that I think we need to understand science first and foremost in order to later understand why and how Marxism is a science itself. So I break down categories of science, ways to interpret it, the process of science overall, the similarities and differences between the fields and branches of science, so on and so forth. There's a lot to go in there. There's a 2-hour episode. I'm very excited. I'd love to hear some feedback, positive, or principled criticisms afterwards to sharpen my line, to see what I got incorrect, see what I got correct. But this is the first part of a mini series where the following episodes will be on the 3 pillars of Marxism. And then the next one will be explaining what is revolution. And finally, the last part of the mini series is going to be describing what is Maoism specifically in this field of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. So very excited to bring that all to you. And then again, it's starting off on January 1st, 2025, with a particular focus on science. And really, I want 2025 to be the year that we put science back into the slogan, Science of Revolution. And what better way to end this year by saying and talking about revisionism and how to understand revisionism. So very excited to have these 2 lineups here with this live stream today and the Polycom episode launching tomorrow.
Yeah, like Bookworm Skates said, sounds based. I agree. I'm really excited about this concept of, okay, we need to get to revisionism. We need to get a deeper understanding of Marxism. So we got to build that understanding from the ground up. And specific to the podcast form, these mini series being pretty popular. Although I'm waiting for the day for you to put a mini series inside of a mini series to be like, okay, wait, actually, in order to talk about this, boom, it's a 10-part series.
It's inevitable.
It's gonna happen at some point. And we have Base Comrade also saying that it would be good to talk about dogmatism and other strains of opportunism as well. We actually have a quote from Mao on the correct handling of contradictions amongst the people that speaks to that as well, where he talks about how revisionism or right opportunism is a bourgeois trend of thought that is even more dangerous than dogmatism. But of course, it's helpful to understand the relationship of the two. So I assume that we're going to be getting into that as well.
Also, there's a section in tomorrow's episode that does talk about Marxism and dogmatism. So,
cool.
Yeah, really good point to bring up in relation to this discussion.
Great. That sounds good. James, please do not watch this while driving from work. Just put it on as a podcast. Put away the video. The new cars, they got bigger and bigger screens in the cars. And a lot of times when I look to my left, when I'm in front of a red light, I just see people going on TikToks. You know what I mean? So we got.
I think we have to do a disclaimer now that please don't watch this while driving. Comrades, communists, we don't do that. We don't want to endanger the lives of other workers.
Exactly. But James, thank you for tuning in, though. And definitely just keep us on that audio only tip. So yeah, lots of different things to chat about today. We really encourage a lot of comments and thoughts and questions as we go. That's the fun stuff about these live streams, is to just try to have it be much more of a collective conversation. We'll be touching on a lot of different topics. And then for the podcast, that'll be your way to just get that really well structured, going from topic to topic, build out the argument, which Jay and the Polycom team does very well. But with that being said, of course, we're going to be talking about what revisionism is. Of course, we need a definition, and through that, we'll be talking about science, the science of Marxism, and also pseudoscience. We got to talk about science and pseudoscience. Got talking about Marxism and revisionism. Then the history of revisionism, which is interesting because a lot of people know some of these points and kind of, all right, Deng Xiaoping, bad guy, sort of revisionist. Why? Where do these ideas come from? And then the current revisionist trends in the U.S. left. And it'll be interesting for people to see the different trends of revisionism that exist here to make connections to those that do exist in other countries as well. And then we'll be taking questions from the audience and just be focusing on a Q&A. But Jay, I'm going to throw you a curveball real quick. Are you ready for a curveball? Who's your favorite revisionist and why?
Ooh, well, first, there's so many to choose from at different levels. It's a good question. Favorite revisionist? Oh man.
Curveball.
I mean, you got some classics in there. You got Khrushchev and you got Deng. You got some original innovators like Bernstein.
The OGs.
The OGs, baby. Dang. You know what? I think Sam Marcy is my favorite.
Ooh, underrated. Underrated
Which
revisionist.
is the underdog, and kind of this hidden significant influence that we'll talk about later on in this episode, or this ain't a podcast, this is the live stream. In this live stream, the really huge impacts that Marxism has today that people just aren't really too conscious or aware of. So this underdog approach is kind of my favorite approach, I think.
Okay, that's a good answer. Mine has to be Deng Xiaoping with the cowboy hat. I mean, it's hard to beat. You know what I mean? He was looking good in the hat. So I gotta
Yeah.
give credit where credit is due. Obviously,
Nice.
obviously we're just messing around. Just starting on a funny note for a serious topic that has serious consequences, and it'll be good to get into that a bit more. So Jay, why don't you start us off to talk a little bit about what revisionism actually is?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Okay, first, this is an incredibly serious topic, and I think is often or more commonly misunderstood, understood, and also misused. So I think the first thing I want to say is that I think one of the most common ways that revisionism is used today is, oh, if someone doesn't agree with me, you're being revisionist. That's not exactly what revisionism is. And that's a very basic and incorrect way of approaching this. Revisionism is based on some material conditions of which it arises from. It does lead to very serious consequences if not handled correctly. And one of the most common ways, especially in the very tiny, small section of the US left that does try to present itself as anti-revisionist, can tend to use this argument of, if someone doesn't agree with me, then they are revisionists. And that's just, we need to stop doing that. And I think this is kind of the importance of why I've been focusing on trying to explain science, and then why Marxism is a science, and then how to approach things scientifically. We can say we are approaching things scientifically all the time, but what that actually means can really determine how we behave and approach other people in these types of issues, resolving them, finding the contradictions, and discussing these things out more thoroughly. So that's the first thing I want to say, is that revisionism and trying to understand how to approach revisionism, just our general initial orientation can be wrong. We need to parse through all kinds of ideas, base and material conditions, to sort out what are the incorrect and correct ideas, what are the anti-revisionist and revisionist ideas, so on and so forth. So let's start talking about the definition of revisionism. So first, revisionism occurs in any situation where someone, or even some group, organization, even party, is interested in achieving socialism. Now, there are many non-Marxists that do want to have socialism, but we should recognize that, first and foremost, Marxism is the science of revolution that has already, throughout 180 years, even more, established concepts that have been proven in practice. Therefore, any change to these established concepts in regards to achieving socialism can be regarded as revisionism, which is the act of revising a correct principle or concept of the science of revolution. I also found it very useful to use the dictionary from massline.org. I can't tell you how valuable this website is. And it's filled with all kinds of great information outside of just its dictionary. But for people wondering about some basic ideas of Marxism, basic concepts, really, this is a really good place to revisit frequently. So massline.org defines revisionism as the invalid or unscientific modification of a correct principle of the science of revolution, that is scientific Marxism, also known today as Marxism, Leninism, Maoism. Now, the term revisionism, however, is rather unfortunate since, of course, every scientific theory must be scientifically revised from time to time in those aspects which are proven to be incorrect or needs further refinement. But in politics, there are many who choose to revise well-supported theories and throw out principles which are certainly correct simply because their own class perspective cannot accept them as they stand. So that is a quote, or a quote and a definition of revisionism from massline.org. It pretty much gets at the core basis of what revisionism is. From there, I think it's really going to expand in applying these core understanding into I think Lenin said it, like the 1,000 shades that will come out of this. And I'd like to share a quote that you mentioned earlier, Space, but to really follow through on what Mao said here in his piece on the correct handling of contradictions among the people. And also, as I go on, Space, feel free to interrupt me if you want to say something or acknowledge something. But Mao says the following: revisionism or right opportunism is a bourgeois trend of thought that is even more dangerous than dogmatism. The revisionists, the right opportunists, pay lip service to Marxism. They too attack dogmatism, but what they are really attacking is the quintessence of Marxism. They oppose or distort materialism and dialectics, oppose or try to weaken the people's democratic dictatorship and the leading role of the Communist Party, and oppose or try to weaken socialist transformation and socialist construction. After the basic victory of the socialist revolution in our country, that is China, there are still a number of people who vainly hope to restore the capitalist system and fight the working class on every front, including the ideological one, that is the ideological front. And the right-hand man in this struggle are the revisionists, end quote. So Mao is also getting here and kind of going a little bit further that this is a right opportunist deviation from the correct line or position of where Marxists should stand. To go a bit further, there is a great quote I want to read from someone from China named Zhang Chunchao in a piece that should be read and is pretty much a classic called On Exercising All-Round Dictatorship Over the Bourgeoisie. Now, this piece starts with an incredibly important point, a point which is not only limited to struggling against revisionism, but a point we should be carrying out on investigating and upholding the principle throughout many other areas of our work. So the following quote from this piece is just this excellent point that I want to read here. Quote, "The question of the dictatorship of the proletariat," right? This question of the dictatorship of the proletariat has been the focus of the struggle between Marxism and revisionism. And then in this quote, they are quoting Lenin saying, "Only he is a Marxist who extends the recognition of the class struggle to the recognition of the dictatorship of the proletariat." That's the end of the Lenin quote. The piece continues, and this is precisely to enable us to go by Marxism and not revisionism in both theory and practice that Chairman Mao calls on the whole nation, not just communists, but the whole nation, to get clear on the question of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, understanding and discussing and coming to more clarity on this question of the dictatorship of the proletariat. Again, going back to my first point, anyone who is interested in achieving socialism, whether they're Marxist or not, should be dealing with this question and coming to clarity on it. I believe Marxists, specifically Marxism or Marxist Leninist Maoists today, are clear on this question. There's a couple of more granular level ideas that we need to continue to discuss, what it looks like in an imperialist country compared to, say, a semi-feudal, semi-colonial country like China, etc. But there's some basic foundations here that we do know of and established concepts and principles that have been proven in practice. And we need to know what those are in order to know what are not established or proven concepts. And then the last point I just want to say is that Marxism overall is a scientific theory specifically of, but not limited to, the capitalist mode of production. It can also extend to understanding how human organization works, how human societies as a whole operate, form, transform, etc. And so if there is revisionism in Marxism, which is a scientific theory, there is also somewhat of a revisionism in science. But in other scientific fields, it's usually called pseudoscience. But that's for the next section. I just want to pause here and see if there's anything else I should address or if Space has anything to respond to here.
There's a lot to unpack there and a lot to break down, a lot of great ideas. I'm really excited to explore. First of all, James, thank you for correcting that. James, everybody was listening, not watching. Big shout out to being safe and have safe listening and media habits. It's important. It's important. So, I wanted to say, I remember the first time when I was called a revisionist, but I actually don't. I do remember a couple of times that stood out. I remember being called a revisionist for making Cancel Rent, the song, because it's impossible to cancel rent under capitalism, which is like, well, actually, you can have a rent strike and then cancel that specific rent. So that's also not true. But also, it just kind of goes to show disagreement with something immediately, it being called revisionism. It's being pretty intense and a way to actually obfuscate what is actually going on is pretty common. So a lot of times I think we've experienced something where we hear an idea, we're not sure why it's wrong. It sounds wrong. We're pretty sure it's wrong, but it's hard for us to break down why it's wrong. And what some more of the, maybe if it's a surface level idea, what the core actual ideas behind it. And then it can be very tempting to just say, well, that's revisionist, and to just leave it there. It's a way to actually shut down arguments. So that's a way that revisionism is commonly used to basically express disagreements, but often also just disagreements without people really understanding why they disagree, or really the depth to why, to being able to break down some of the incorrect ideas. So we should be really wary of that. And when somebody puts that forward, we should ask people to break down why something is revisionist. And how it really goes against some core principles of the science of Marxism, and not in a way to shut down conversations. And we can help other people that are kind of struggling with some of this stuff to help them break down some of their ideas a bit more in a way that is more useful to maybe get to some core ideas that are wrong. Maybe they are getting to an idea that is wrong, and we can help them break that down. But we really should struggle against that tendency of the way that revisionism is used. Another connected idea there is also why, or a core reason why people are using that is because common in the left is to see Marxism, different trends within Marxism as different flavors of Marxism, so you can just you can get your little froyo, you can get you can get yourself a little Marxism Leninism, you can get yourself a little Maoism, you can get yourself a little Trotskyism, and maybe some of the some of the sprinkled peanuts, on top is I don't know, Marxism or whatever. So okay, I'm getting all these different trends and flavors together in my cup, and that having that diverse array of flavors kind of sets me up to at least have some correct ideas. Rather, really seeing is that, well, a class has an ideology, and like Lenin said, well, the proletariat can really only have one ideology, and that's proletarian ideology. There can really only be one proletarian worldview. There can be only correct or incorrect ideas. So we both need to break down kind of this insecurity that lies behind the incorrect ways of using revisionism, but also a misunderstanding really of approaching Marxism as a whole science, through which we have to debate some of the core principles. And when somebody's revisionist, they're attacking some of these core principles in a way that is detached often from concrete reality. So, if somebody attacks this idea or says that peaceful coexistence is possible, for example, or that the capitalists will peacefully give up their power, more so. Well, we can see through concrete reality that that's not true. We can see through history that that's not true. And so we need to point to many different historical examples that we have in order to really be able to lay out why some of these attacks on the basic principles of Marxism, that it is really reality that is our teacher. It is past experience that is our teacher. Now, there are times in which you can put forward a theory and kind of deduce from reality of what is likely to happen, and for that to be verified later on. But at this point in almost 2025, we have reality has shown us a lot in its wide variety of experiences and colors, of what ideas have really been proven to be correct and incorrect. So that is really important to take into account. Also, Vincent. Just
Could I
want to give a
respond to
shout
that
out to
after
Vincent VGA, a New Year's Eve revisionism stream. Of course, where else other than at Marxism Today? But go ahead, Jay.
Nice. Yeah, just to respond, yeah, I thought that was a very good breakdown of both keeping politics in command, but also really just practically understanding and applying a lot of these things for myself and also the audience, I'm sure. Understanding this idea that Lenin put forward, that there's basically only two ideologies at this point, a bourgeois ideology and a communist ideology, which hints at there's this contradiction between ideas from the bourgeoisie, or ideas that are in the interest of the bourgeoisie, and then ideas that are in the interest of communists and the working class as a whole. I think this goes back to the very first thing I said about how we approach understanding revisionism. I think basically, let me put it like this. When you join the communism subreddit, or when you join an organization that is trying to base itself in some anti-revisionist Marxism, are you just siloing yourself off and separating yourself from the rest of society, and therefore you've already expelled all your bourgeois ideas? Like, no, that doesn't happen. Even in China, when they had, during their socialist transition period, and having a pretty strong established communist party with a central committee, these ideas, this central committee, this party was not exempt or separated from the rest of society, which they lived in a society that still had these class contradictions in them. And so even at the top levels of the Chinese Communist Party, there were bourgeois ideas, revisionist ideas that were coming about. So we can't be so, really, I think the logical conclusion here is that we can't be approaching this in a metaphysical way of just being like, okay, I am now enlightened by the science of revolution, and therefore I have gotten rid of all the bourgeois ideas and incorrect ideas. I know what anti-revisionism is. I know what revisionism is. So I'm good. No, it doesn't happen like that. And it's a constant struggle that's going to go on until all classes are gone in the entire world. So keep that in mind. And this is a constant struggle that we have to really investigate with a scientific approach, not only ourselves, but our close comrades of society as a whole. What are what's the logical conclusion of these ideas? Is it going to lead down the capitalist road, or is it going to take us further towards communism? And this is a skill that I think much of the Marxist milieu in the US needs to develop, including myself. I'm not exempting myself from that. I need to develop these skills. I think I have a pretty good starting point, but we're all fairly new considering the communist history of this country and really the lack thereof in the past several decades. So I just want to keep that in mind for everyone.
Yeah, no, I think those are some good points. We have RP Sharma says Prachanda Jindabad. I don't know if Jindabad is the same thing as Zindabad. In that case, I would definitely disagree. And some we can talk about the Prachanda's capitulationist politics in Nepal later. But if Jindabad means down with as opposed to Zindabad, then I'm down with that. But unfortunately, my Hindi isn't that good. So
it would be nice to get some clarity if this person.
Yeah. Let us know, RP. Let us know, or maybe not. We'll see. So Abisha, I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, comrade. So Abisha said, I swear I'm not being glib, but has the concept of revisionism changed with time? What's your take on that, Jay? And oh yeah, we got the question up on the screen. What do you want me to? Do you want me to take a stab at that one?
Why don't you start off? I'm actually very interested in what you have to say about this.
Cool. So okay. Well, first off, I'm glad that you're asking questions. There's no glibness here in Marxism today. I know what being glib means, but I assume that look, this is a great question to ask. So, has the concept of revisionism changed with time? So, if by that we understand basically from the origin point of Marxism, not going all the way back in human history, and whether it's changed with time. So, as the science of Marxism has developed, there have been some core principles that have remained really from the starting point of Marxism, such as class struggle being the motor of class society throughout history in its developments. That still rings true, and that will still ring true. That's a very basic principle of Marxism. So revisionists who attack that in the 1880s and then the 1980s and then now, that's still the same principle. So in that sense, it's a revisionist trend, revisionist idea, a bourgeois idea that that we still need to struggle against. That being said, there is a development of the way that revisionist ideas manifest and how the bourgeoisie willingly spreads these different ideas. So, for example, through postmodernism, I mean, that's a new development, kind of a new bourgeois invention to allow for more of the proliferation of revisionist ideas. So, the ways that they spread changes and develops, and also with the breadth of development of Marxism, so does the development continue of different revisionist ideas. So, for example, this idea of the inter-party bourgeoisie, that a bourgeoisie really emerges and takes hold within the Communist Party. That is relatively, in terms of the historic scale of Marxism, pretty new idea, even though it's described something that was already happening before. And so really this revisionist idea that, well, for example, the fact that China, for example, is still socialist currently in a socialist transition, which baked within it contains many different revisionist ideas, but also negates that one specific new development within Marxism. So something that we consistently come up against with revisionism is this old and the new, where it's like, okay, there are basic principles of Marxism that are being negated, that are being attacked. But the ways in which these ideas proliferate, these new revisionist ideas that develop in reaction and response to new developments of Marxism, means that, and different historical trends, really actually in many different ways, revisionism does proliferate and transform. What's your take
Yeah,
on
I'll add
that?
on to that. I think that was excellent. I really appreciate that. I mean, just to kind of sum up and then maybe try to segue into the next section. There are, going from what you said in the beginning, there are stages of development in this scientific theory of Marxism. And in each stage, there are ideas. There are ideas in Maoism that just could not have developed before those concepts were established, say, in China. And so that is one way of looking at how revisionism can develop alongside these new stages in the theory. There's new concepts that are developed. I mean, even on a scientific side of things, thinking about Newton's, Sir Isaac Newton's theory and law of gravity, and how centuries later Albert Einstein came up with a further refinement and development of a theory and laws of gravity. And with each development in certain fields of science, there's going to be other types of revisionism that occurs. But so there's both a new developments in revisionism, but there's also a continual trend that is very similar, going back to the origins of revisionism within the theory of Marxism. So I'll kind of sum it up there. I think I'd like to move on to the next section to really talk about the history, to go a little bit deeper and more concrete about the history of revisionism. I think to start off, listen, when Marx and Engels started to really develop this science, one of the three pillars is dealing with the socialist theories that were coming out of France specifically, mainly utopian socialist theories. And the point I want to bring up is that right from the beginning, Marx and Engels had to engage with and debate these ideas. There's always polemics and disagreements and struggles at every stage of development of this theory historically. And so that's the starting point before we approach this. But again, I think Marxism started to really develop as a concrete scientific theory throughout the lives of Marx and Engels, and really going into the Second International, where these concepts were established, but then it started to be revised. And this is where revisionism really starts to come in. And so, I don't know, I kind of see the original revisionist, or at least a more common approach when studying the history of revisionism, always takes you to this figure named Edward Bernstein. So who was Edward Bernstein? So first, he was a prominent German social democratic revisionist theoretician and politician who led the Social Democratic Party of Germany, commonly referred to as the SPD. And he developed a thing called evolutionary socialism. This is kind of what we revolutionary Marxists would recognize as just mere bourgeois liberal reformism. That's what evolutionary socialism is. And so he was developing these ideas and many, many other revisionist ideas in direct relation to the already established concepts that were forming within Marxism. And this was happening in the Second International, one in which Lenin and the Bolsheviks were involved with, right? A lot of this stuff led to what we can now call Bernsteinism, something like that, right? It's kind of, I mean, it's just a revisionist trend in the Second International, which arose mainly out of Germany, but impacted all aspects of the Marxist movement of the time in the late 19th century, early 20th century. And it really is just, it really took Marxism and tried to go down this legal form. And it also had so many other type of repercussions leading to something called legal Marxism, even economism, Menshevism, so on and so forth. These are a lot of the things that Lenin was fighting and struggling against during his time, and the Bolsheviks as well. And Lenin writes specifically about a lot of these things in his classic piece, What is to be Done? Which, again, everyone should be reading and studying on a frequent and consistent basis. But he does say this quote that I'm going to read from What is to be Done. The essence of the new trend, which adopts a critical attitude towards obsolete dogmatic Marxism, has been clearly enough presented by Bernstein and demonstrated by Millerand, which is another figure. According to them, social democracy must change from a party of social revolution into a democratic party of social reforms. Bernstein has surrounded this political demand with a whole battery of well-attuned new arguments, new in quotations, and reasonings. Denied was the possibility of putting socialism on a scientific basis and of demonstrating its necessity and inevitability from the point of view of the materialist conception of history. Denied was the fact of growing impoverishment, the process of proletarianization, and the intensification of capitalist contradictions. The very concept, the ultimate aim, so to speak, was declared to be unsound, and the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat was completely rejected. Denied was the antithesis in principle between liberalism and socialism. Denied was the theory of the class struggle on the alleged grounds that it could not be applied to a strictly democratic society governed according to the will of the majority. Thus, the demand for a decisive turn from revolutionary social democracy, or in today's terms, revolutionary communism, to bourgeois social reformism was accompanied by a no less decisive turn towards bourgeois criticism of all the fundamental ideas of Marxism. So this is a couple of points I just wanted to lay out in going back to the Second International, really not limited to, but a prominent figure, Edward Bernstein. And I think these ideas are going to follow us back in later sections of this live stream. So incredibly important to understand the really reformist and revisionist nature of the ideas that came from Bernstein that still impact us here in the US, an entirely different country, more than 100 years later. So to show the seriousness of these ideas and the impacts of these ideas.
Yeah, the OG one. Yeah, so, and it's helpful to read at least a bit of some of these revisionists like Bernstein, although you shouldn't do it the way that I did it, which is probably the first real Marxist text that I ever read was Reform or Revolution by Rosa Luxemburg. So I was very interested in this question of, I don't think it makes sense to have reform. I'm curious about this revolution thing. Let me read this Reform or Revolution. That'll answer my question. And then it was Rosa Luxemburg really railing against Bernstein. And I don't know who any of these people are. And I'm so confused. I just wanted to know whether we need reform or revolution. But for people who have somewhat of a basis, and assuming that for people who watch Marxism today, at least you have some basis here. If not, go check out the Socialism 101 and 201 series for, to get some of these fundamental Marxist concepts. And also for the people who are tuning in a little bit later, Politics in Command, rebrand, relaunch, starting from tomorrow, with a new Politics in Command episode coming about the science of Marxism. Help us break down some of these basic concepts a lot better, and not be in the position that I was in, being extremely confused reading Reform or Revolution. But it can be helpful to just look at some of the stuff that people like Bernstein were saying, and especially some of the Marxist language that they were using. And really, because in evolutionary socialism, it's a text from 1899, I believe. Yes, 1899. He does use a lot of this Marxist language to really sometimes sneak in and sometimes lay bare some pretty obviously wrong ideas, because he talks about what are the preliminary conditions of the realization of socialism. Historical materialism sees them first in the modern development of production. You're like, okay, historical materialism. This person uses historical materialism. That sounds good. That sounds cool. This person knows what he's talking about. And in that way, we really have to see, kind of go beyond the surface. Okay, how is this person utilizing historical materialism? What conclusions are they getting to? And also, what conclusions are they sneaking in? Because, for example, when he talks about the different preliminary conditions, he says, the second preliminary condition, according to the theory of Marx. So again, okay, I'm really relying on Marx here. I'm good. This is Marx talking. Is the conquest of the political power by the proletariat. One could think of this conquest in various ways: by the path of parliamentary struggle, turning the right to vote to good account, or by the path of force by means of a revolution. It's okay, all right. Marx saying this, so kind of relying on this argument of authority, and then kind of saying, yeah, there's both. We can use the parliamentary route. We can use revolution. These are all different questions or answers to the same question. It's like, well, okay, first of all, something isn't just correct because Marx says it. We have to apply what Marx is saying to the conditions. We have to have reality be our teacher and apply it. Does this make sense here? And then also to see whether there's things like false equivalence. So just saying, well, look, we agree there's a path to the parliamentary route, there's the revolutionary route, and there's some kind of connection between the two. It's like, no, what is the connection? What are you basing this on? Especially with this happening after the Paris Commune. Are you taking the lessons of an actual historical revolution into account with the Paris Commune? So in that sense, it really shows us to be on the lookout for different things. For when people say that something is true because a great Marxist says it was true, be on the lookout for it. To not get enticed by some of these fancy Marxist words, and to see whether the analysis of somebody is sound, not just because they're saying the right words, but also that people are really concrete in what they're talking about, and to not just take something for granted, and to ask lots of questions about the development of the analysis. Because something like evolutionary socialism and basically negating this path towards revolution happens in a lot of different ways now. And often when you ask maybe 2 or 3 questions, you get to see that people haven't really thought too deeply about actual revolutionary strategy, but actual revolutionary path based on historical examples and based on an analysis of our contemporary society, so that it is much easier for some of these revisionist ideas to really proliferate, because it just fills in the gaps of all this stuff that you haven't really thought about so concretely, which is very different than somebody just being like, oh, got to stop these communists. Let me really proliferate my revisionist ideas to stop that. But that this is really a danger also of people who aren't really making, like Lenin said, a concrete analysis of concrete conditions. Bernstein bears, yeah, maybe James, we can call them that. I don't know. Is that like a new insult? So Jay, is there anything more? Is there anything you want to respond to, or would you like to go a bit deeper into Bernstein, the OG?
No, I think we're good on Bernstein. I do want to quickly recognize the international audience here. It's really great to see, and this is something we've seen as a pattern that has been developing with the Marxism Today audience. So really appreciate a special thank you to the folks who are in different time zones taking time to watch this. Also for people here in the U.S., obviously appreciate you watching this as well, but it's also a good reminder to think about the international audience we have. So really kind of just grateful for that, and thank you for tuning in. I think we can continue. We're still on this section of talking about the history of revisionism, and obviously with the history of revisionism, we got to talk about the two most prominent socialist countries during the 20th century. That is the Soviet Union and China. Now, these, because they are some of the most well-studied examples of socialism, there's going to be a lot of emphasis and a lot of focus on studying the history of revisionism here. So I don't think we need to stay on this section for too long, but I do want to mention it. Let's start with the Soviet Union. Very amazing history establishing socialism in one country for the very first time, and at the end of 1917. But at some point, it turned into something different. And so I just kind of want to mention this historical trend and a very quick point here, because again, there's a lot to look up here. You can find various sources on, there's another website I'd want to plug, bandthought.net. Bandthought.net. It can be a little funky, but just use the search engine at the bottom of that website. Tons of stuff to read here and learn about this history. And then also going back to massline.org, there is a section in the dictionary. If you look up a Soviet Union leader named Nikita Khrushchev, which I'm going to mention here in a second, but under the Nikita Khrushchev section of that dictionary, there's a lot of material to really go off of. So it lays a good foundation. One of the things it does say is that when Stalin died in 1953, who was the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, who then replaced him, and what happened? This is a crucial period to kind of understand. Nikita Khrushchev, then became the first secretary of the party. And then 3 years later, at the 20th Party Congress in 1956, he gave this, what's referred to as a secret speech, but really it was leaked and wasn't so secret, where Khrushchev denounced everything that Stalin did and his errors and crimes, which Stalin did make a lot of errors, but he also did a lot of good things to keep socialism on its correct path. So we also have to recognize both the errors and the positive influences he had in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. But Khrushchev gave this speech from a very bourgeois standpoint, not a Marxist-Leninist one. The next year after this speech, he demoted his main rivals in the party, Molotov, Kaganovich, Palenkov. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Again, this is all in the Khrushchev section of Massline Dictionary. And then, demoting his rivals, he consolidated his personal bourgeois power. From then on, he more and more promoted the process of changing what remained of socialism in the Soviet Union into state capitalism. He further promoted the expansion of privileges for high-ranking party members, that is, the bureaucrats in the party that do align with his ideas, his bourgeois ideas. And he also promoted economic reforms that made production more dependent on profits. He also gave material bonuses to workers rather than, say, moral education and rewards, so on and so forth. With this influence and change in the policy of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, and then we can say most anti-revisionists, especially Maoists, agree that 1956 was a real drastic turning point in transformation of the Soviet Union overall. So I just want to leave it there for that point for the Soviet Union before I go on to China and see if there's anything I want to respond to in the comments or see what Space might have to say.
Yeah, with that, it's important to see that the basis of this analysis is really that class struggle continues under socialism, because right now, with the working class not in power, it is really important to combat a lot of these revisionist ideas in order to really build up the communist movement, to lay out a different revolutionary strategy in our respective countries, and to understand the different class forces, to understand society as it exists right now, to take the correct lessons from different past revolutionary struggles, and to really currently struggle to combat revisionism, to really defend Marxism in order to build up this core communist movement, because communist movements in a lot of countries are very small. So in this sense, us combating revisionism, on the one hand, is the same as it was in the Soviet Union in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. But on the other hand, we are approaching that from a very different basis. But it's important to look at the root of the different revisionist trends that existed in the Soviet Union, to understand them, where they came from, in order for us to be able to better understand where all these different revisionist ideas are coming from for us today. And it also can just help to explain why it's difficult to really build up like a strong communist core, and why we spend a good amount of time and energy to really consolidate the core communist movement around actual Marxism. So just wanted to say that first. And then this idea that class struggle continues under socialism actually sharpens under socialism. There is still commodity production. There's still production for exchange under socialism. There's still a lot of strong bourgeois ideas, proliferation of bourgeois ideas, because there's still an international bourgeoisie, and then also within the party, through this continued commodity production, production for exchange, through this continued bureaucratic privileges, where if you have a high-ranking position in the party, you're better off. Due to factors like these, due to the existence of all these things, class struggle is still continuing under socialism. It sharpens, and this very sharp struggle, as it plays out within society, also plays out within the party. And thus, there is a struggle from within the party to take the capitalist road. And so, looking at it from that perspective, and looking at the different class forces as they existed in the Soviet Union, it's a very different picture than Khrushchev just, putting his finger in just the bop and pressing the capitalism button just because he wanted to. but he was really acting on the will of the inner party bourgeoisie, which really representative of the still current like existing bourgeoisie, and there are some specific real shortcomings in Stalin's analysis at the time. This recognition in the 1934 Constitution, for example, that class struggle was practically over. The way in which there wasn't this active proliferation of actual struggle about these ideas in the party, and that it wasn't really promoted in society at large. All these different ideas and or just looking at these trends, it can really help to push us to see one where different revisionist ideas come from here, and that when we're engaging with different ideas, different political ideas, that we can try to understand, do these ideas represent the class interest of the proletariat, or do these ideas represent the class interest of the bourgeoisie? Because it's the same principle with some of Khrushchev's reforms, so to speak, really this dismantling of the socialist system that existed, that there was a real need to look at some of these ideas which had already proliferated, which were bourgeois ideas which represented the interests of the bourgeoisie, that they had already existed and were proliferating and were promoted by some sections of the party and society, and that they really reached dominance. And then we can see, okay, well, when we deal with revisionists here in the US or in different countries, it's not a thing of just somebody, this evil revisionist person who's just willing this revisionism into existence, but it's basically just carrying out these bourgeois ideas that exist, that are being proliferated by the bourgeoisie in the society. And I think it's really helpful to keep that level-headed approach, and to really have a class analysis of all these different things, and also for us to really consider why it is so important to study these periods of capitalist restoration. Not only does it help us to understand the development of the different communist movements, why socialism in Soviet Union and in China were defeated, but also to help us gain a better and more thorough understanding of our current conditions here as well.
Yeah, let me add on to that, because it's a really good point, especially the idea that you mentioned of where do these ideas come from. There's an excellent piece called On the Inner Party Bourgeoisie in the Socialist Period that I think is well worth reading and studying. And it really kind of addresses this point that you just laid out for us, that even under socialism, there exists an apparatus enforcing what they say, the observance of the rules of law on people to organize social labor, where some representatives must be chosen by the state and the laboring masses to exercise the function of administering and managing social production, right? If you're new to Marxism, we start with production. That's one of the main areas of where all ideas kind of come from and how society is built off of. Of course, we got to look at it dialectically. That's a whole nother can of worms to open that I'm not going to open right now. But in this arrangement of social production, specifically in the socialist period in which this piece is writing from, society will have a large segment of people mainly carrying out mental labor, another segment carrying out manual labor. And the existence of this type of social division of labor is one of the most important sources of social inequality. And they go on to quote Engels from Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, where he says, "It is therefore the law of division of labor that lies at the basis of this division in the classes." So I just really wanted to reinforce what you said, that a lot of these ideas come from the material conditions in which we live. specifically how social production has its own division of labor in it within a class divided society. But yeah, shall I move on? I mean, yeah, so I do kind of want to just move on to, there's a lot I would like to talk about. So I'll just quickly, again, especially people who are getting into anti-revisionist politics, specifically Maoism, China. China is a very big and important source to study the historical transformation that it went through. It's inspiring, but there's so many great lessons to learn from where they were waging revolution for decades. The Communist Party came into power, the land reforms that went into it, the organization of the peasants, eventually going into socialist construction, and eventually getting to the great proletarian cultural revolution. So a lot to study there, too much to say here. But really that China is also another country that has transformed from a great example of socialism in one country that then degenerated, where the inner party bourgeoisie took over and transformed the entire country. And again, the Soviet Union and China are really great examples of the seriousness we should have in understanding the impacts of revisionist ideas. These ideas can change an entire society, impacting the lives of millions and millions of people. This is how serious it is, right? Of course, with approaching these things so seriously, we shouldn't lead to just militarizing everything and just like attacking anybody who has a bad idea or anything like that. So I do want to steer away from that, but it is very serious. And so with the case of China, the Great Cultural Revolution took off in 1966. It ended in 1976. 1976 is also the year Mao Zedong died. And so with the death of Mao Zedong, pretty similar to the death of Stalin in the Soviet Union, what happened then? Well, this guy who wore a cowboy hat and was Space's favorite revisionist, called Deng Xiaoping, took power. Not only himself, but the whole bourgeois faction within the Central Committee, within the party, and even throughout Chinese society as a whole. And they really started to change policy, really started to spread their bourgeois ideas that started to take hold. Again, it was a class divided society, so anybody who was already having those interests of bourgeois ideas help their own interests, their conditions, started to take these ideas and policies and implement them, and eventually changing and transforming the entire society. So what really happened here? I mean, so just to back up, during the socialist period of China, there was a really large effort to collectivize the production in agriculture specifically, which is a huge, important, significant portion of Chinese society overall. After all, they had a large peasantry that were mainly focused on the production of agriculture. And under Mao and under the proletarian leadership of the Communist Party of China, they really made huge strides in collectivizing agriculture. So what Deng Xiaoping did is he started to decollectivize this production side of agriculture. There's a really great book, and by the way, there's a great episode on this very specific topic on politics and command. The episode is called China from Communes to Capitalism, where I interview Jun Xu, who is the author of a book called From Commune to Capitalism: How China's Peasants Lost Collective Farming and Gained Urban Poverty. And one of the arguments he makes here is by decollectivizing the production of agriculture, it broke the alliance between the workers in the urban areas and the peasants in the countryside in the production of agriculture, right? What does the hammer and sickle mean? Where did that symbol come from? Not only does it represent communism, historical examples of socialism in one country, but at the core of it, it is a hammer and a sickle that represents the alliance between the workers and the peasants. the sickle representing the peasants, the hammer representing the workers. Deng Xiaoping broke this alliance while still upholding this symbol of the hammer and sickle. Just think about that for a second. And he did this by breaking the decollectivized agricultural communes. He really promoted the idea. The Cultural Revolution was really sending workers to the countryside to live amongst the peasants, to see what production was like, to really kind of break this, what I mentioned earlier, this division between mental and manual labor, and the division between the urban areas and the countryside, to really continue that alliance between the workers and the peasants. And this is a huge, one of the main things that we need to study if we're going to study the revisionist transformation and the reversal in China. There's many other ideas to get into. I don't really want to talk too much about it, but because it's just simply too much. But this decollectivization of agriculture is like a really good starting point for people who want to understand how the policies and the bourgeois ideas of, say, Deng Xiaoping and even Liu Shaoqi, among others, really transformed the entire society of hundreds of millions of people in one society, that is China.
Yeah, it's really a question of two roads. And Fred Engst, we had a really great interview with him about the Cultural Revolution, and we have part 2 coming real soon. And something that he talks about in the interview, but also in some of the articles that he wrote, is this difference between line and road. And that what we saw in the Soviet Union, what we saw in China, is that there's a difference between the capitalist road and really the socialist road to communism. And that there is, which is why capitalist roaders, where they came from, people who took the capitalist road. And that people who take the capitalist road, they wanted to build up China, to develop China using capitalist logic. And so we have people like Deng Xiaoping, Liu Shaoqi, who earlier in the party were pointing at real problems to overcome in society. For example, really the poverty in the countryside, let's say, the backwardness, the real need to develop agriculture all around, to really mechanize the countryside, to have more large scale irrigation works, for example, building dams, electrifying the countryside, all these real things that needed to happen. But that there are different roads, really, in terms of how you develop the countryside, how you tackle such a question. It's a political question. The way that you develop really determines everything. And so that also for Deng Xiaoping, it wasn't that he just pressed the capitalism button in 76, but that with something like dismantling the collectivization in the countryside, that these had been ideas that after feudalism was eradicated, that all the peasants basically had their own plot of land. When they had eliminated landlordism in the early 50s, that then was the question, okay, how do we develop? What kind of logic do we use? And somebody like Liu Shaoqi, you kind of see as a forerunner of Deng Xiaoping, or really the agent of the bourgeoisie, is probably a better fit there. Already put forward bourgeois ideas and a capitalist way of developing the countryside. For example, mechanization before collectivization, which is that at first we just need to mechanize before we can really think about building up these communes, building up these big cooperatives of peasants working together. We just need to mechanize the countryside first, which would be a way to develop the countryside, but it would have really proliferated this big divide between rich peasants and poor peasants, and really rich capital, like agricultural capitalists on the countryside. Basically what's happening now is what would have happened. And so these ideas that people like Liu Shaoqi were putting forward, such as the fact that we can collectivize once 70% of all the peasants on the countryside are rich peasants, well, you can't have rich peasants without exploitation. So that's never going to happen. That's a pipe dream. So it's just a way of saying we're never going to have collectivization. That these ideas are again really rooted in uh, thinking about development in capitalist terms, and that there was a struggle that within the party of really how do we develop China, uh, and what kind of politics should be in command? Should it be bourgeois politics in command or proletarian politics in command? And that framework we can apply to a question like developing the countryside. We can also apply it to the question of building up a communist party. How do we go about doing that? Uh, do we go about that in a Menshevik way, where basically anybody can just join and you don't really need this core degree of professional revolutionaries, where we have really steel discipline, a high level of theoretical unity, to really start to build up communist movement and communist forces. Do we do that, or do we just have everybody join? Basically, what a lot of people currently in the DSA are advocating for. And so what politics are in command with those decisions? What politics, what kind of logic are we utilizing when we're saying that to build up a communist party, anybody who kind of remotely agrees vaguely with these politics, what kind of politics does that promote within the party? Does that promote proletarian politics or bourgeois politics? Does that promote proletarian ideas or bourgeois ideas? And then even that, we're not going to do a breakdown of that now, but to also just think about it like, okay, why is this idea proletarian? Why is this idea bourgeois? Why is mechanization before collectivization? Why is that a bourgeois idea? Well, it's a bourgeois idea because it quite literally promotes a bourgeoisie actually on the countryside. If you're not collectivizing, you're just going to have this major development, this gap between people who own more and more means of production and who employ more and more wage labor. Okay, so we can clearly see that that's a bourgeois idea. It literally promotes the existence of a bourgeoisie in the countryside. So again, we shouldn't study these periods in abstraction. We should really apply Marxism to these periods and to think about how our analysis of that period can help to strengthen our goals and our analysis of this period currently. But yeah, I think something we keep bumping into is wanting to get really deep into some of these things. We're just trying to give an overview. So I think it could be good to, in the comments, I'm seeing a good amount of stuff about Prachanda. So maybe if you would want to give just a quick overview about that, and then maybe quickly about some revisionist trends today, and then we can move on to the Q&A.
Yes, I have been seeing those comments as well. Appreciate people at least asking about it. I may disagree with some of the positions put forward in the comments, but let me talk about it from the way that I see it. So first, who was Prachanda? What does Prachanda mean? Well, it really goes back to a person whose real name is Pushpa Kamel Daha. I think I'm probably not pronouncing that totally correct, but it's someone from Nepal. He became the general secretary of the Communist Party of Nepal (parentheses Maoist), who eventually, at the end of Nepal's protracted People's War (PPW), ended up capitulating. Let me just briefly mention this: that in 1996. The Communist Party of Nepal Maoists launched a 10-year protracted People's War. And although this PPW was initially quite small and primitive, it actually expanded and became more powerful as it spread throughout the rural areas. For some time, the current, at that time, feudal government, not today, at that time, 1996, in the 90s, the feudal government used only police forces and some actually like paramilitary forces to attack the revolutionaries. And the Nepalese army mostly stayed on the sidelines. But then gradually this Nepalese army became more active in its counter-revolutionary efforts. And beginning in 2001, this Nepalese army and the revolutionary forces came into open confrontation. Nevertheless, the PPW continued to expand and win the ever broader support of the Nepalese people. I mean, this is 21st century history here. This is kind of crazy that this happened so recently. And some entire extensive regions of the countryside were liberated. And by 2006, 10 years into this PPW, some estimates were that the revolutionaries controlled 80% of the countryside. So within a span of 10 years, somewhere up to 80% of the country was controlled under this Maoist party. But then what happened? Basically, the leaders, which include Prachanda, capitulated, threw down their arms, and decided to integrate. And also at this time, they had basically destroyed the feudal power, and it was going into a ruling class made up of several different parties that were in this government on this new stage of capitalism that was emerging. And so what Prachanda did and other leaders, they capitulated and changed the fundamental essence of this Communist Party in Nepal, Maoist, into a very reformist parliamentary political party that still exists today, and believe that are still pushing socialist ideas through, going back to the ideas of Bernstein, through peacefully transforming evolutionary socialism towards socialism in Nepal today. So that's the basic gist of Prachanda. The reasons for this have never really been clear from especially these leaders who capitulated. It's something to kind of debate. There could be some ideas of fear of foreign intervention, that if this Maoist party came to power through revolutionary means, that say the U.S. imperialist military, or even nearby the Indian military, could invade. And maybe there are some backdoor talks about this that put some fear into Prachanda and other leaders. I don't know. There's a lot to kind of dive into more here and study and discuss. But the overall objective reality is that they threw down their arms, gave up, and merged with the existing bourgeois parliamentary powers. So it's pretty clear to say that, and also Nepal is not a socialist country today. Nowhere, they're far from it. Nowhere near being socialism in one country. So to kind of uphold the Prachanda path, as many would call it, it just doesn't really make sense to me from an anti-revisionist lens. So yeah, that's kind of all I want to say about Prachanda and Nepal. I'm very interested in this topic. I'd love to do an episode on this in sometime in the future, but I'll leave it at that, because I do want to mention at some point before we close out this live stream some of the current revisionist trends, specifically here in the US left. Yeah, that's all I want to say about Nepal right now.
And I think just for the sake of time, I think it would be good to move on to the current trends so we can have some more time for Q&A.
Yeah, let's do that then. So I just want to mention some of the more significant, and then also more maybe insignificant, smaller revisionist trends that are happening in the US, just to identify them here. There's a lot more that needs to go into. I think we've laid somewhat of a decent foundation here on the live stream of understanding revisionism, but at least we can also end off some of these discussions with at least identifying these trends, so that the audience can start to put a label on it and then begin investigations of their own into understanding these things, why they're revisionist and whatnot. Again, there's going to be a much more thorough, more theoretically based episodes in the future on Politics in Command podcast. So stay tuned for that. You can follow Politics in Command on Instagram. We have a new facelift, by the way, a sort of rebranding on Instagram that I think we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on. But so I think that there's three major significant revisionist trends that is impacting all parts of the US left. The first one is going back to Bernstein, which I think we can kind of identify and label as neo-Bernsteinism. And really, you mentioned this earlier, Space. This really comes through the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. But it's not limited to the DSA, because there's a very large group of unaffiliated socialists, or even some that might label themselves as Marxists, who do hold on to these neo-Bernsteinian ideas of peacefully transforming capitalism, especially an imperialist country, into a socialist one. The second large, more significant revisionist trend is Trotskyism. And this plays out through one organization called the International Marxist Tendency, IMT. One of the biggest things I think a lot of us have seen in the major cities across America is the RCA, Revolutionary Communists of America. I don't know if you've seen these posters in the parks that you go to, or just throughout the city, where there's the image of Marx looking like Uncle Sam, pointing directly at you and asking you the question, are you a communist? And I don't know, I think they may have a QR code or just a website link that you can go to. And it says very clearly, apply here to be a communist, which I don't know. I really don't like this form of attracting people. But it is a Trotskyist organization, and there's some real deep issues with Trotskyism. After the mini-series, as I mentioned earlier about Politics in Command, we're doing a mini-series on the foundations of MLM. After that series, we're doing a series on Trotskyism to lay out more theoretically and concretely why Trotskyism is a revisionist idea and steers away from the scientific theory of Marxism. Now, I've said neo-Bernsteinianism and Trotskyism as the two larger trends. There's a third one I mentioned at the very beginning of this live stream, that is Marxism, which comes from a guy named Sam Marcy, who started and founded an organization that still exists today, I think in 1958 or somewhere around there, Workers' World Party, or some people call them Workers' World. And then in 2004, Workers' World split and created PSL, the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And so these two organizations push out Marxist ideas, which is a very specific type of Trotskyism only in the US. It's so specific that other Trotskyists really hate Marxism as well. And PSL, for example, we know they have a large media infrastructure apparatus that influence the overall US left and push out these Marxist ideas without ever talking about Sam Marcy. There's nothing about Sam Marcy on their websites. It's pretty crazy. I would imagine there's nothing about Sam Marcy internal to their organization, because the PSL members who have left PSL that I've spoken to know nothing about Sam Marcy. Very interesting thing to kind of understand more there. I don't really know what's going on. All right. Those are the three larger trends that are significant to the US left. Now, I just want to quickly touch on the more smaller influences, smaller revisionist trends that are at least insignificant to the larger US left, but within the anti-revisionist sphere, or the Maoist sphere within the US left, these are much more significant. And I think there's two here, even though there's many more, but there's two that I at least want to identify and start to get people to at least identify them and to at least approach these ideas, to one, investigate them, but to be kind of wary of, to go in with some hesitation. Yeah. So the first one is, we can label it as Avakianism. It comes from the Revolutionary Communist Party of USA. They're more known as the RevComs. And Avakianism it's kind of weird. I just want to mention that in RCP's origins, when they were a revolutionary union, even in the early beginning of the party, when it formed in 1975, they had some really good stances and positions and lines that were anti-revisionist. And there's a lot of history to be studied there in the late 60s and 70s. But basically around 1978, they really changed their line and have really devolved into something entirely different today that we do name as a Avakianism. It leads to like post-Maoist theory, leads to great man theory, and their strategy overall is really just oversimplified, and it really, a lot of people have accused them of being a cult. That is kind of something to think about there, but I just want to push that we should be taking a scientific approach to investigating these ideas, and just calling them a cult and not actually digging deeper is an issue in and of itself. And then within the Maoist bubble, the anti-revisionist bubble here in the US, at least the small circles, there's a second trend, and that is Gonzaloism, or what people call Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, principally Maoist thought, or even Gonzalo thought. Many different names, maybe different shades, but overall, I think it's Gonzaloism. It takes the ideas of Abigail Guzman, or Gonzalo from Peru, from the struggle in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, and try to form this as the fourth sword of MLM, so on and so forth. There's a really good, if you want to go into this, there's a really good piece by MCU, Maoist Communist Union, on their website, in their journal called Red Pages, specifically in the 3rd issue. And there's a piece called A Critical Evaluation of Gonzaloism. It's fairly long, it's pretty deep, but it is so concrete in spelling out the incorrect ideas in Gonzaloism, with a lot of good historical examples of not just pointing out what was done incorrectly in Peru, but comparing it directly to what happened correctly in, say, the Soviet Union, or in China, or what has been happening recently in India with the Maoists there. So these are the two smaller revisionist trends of Avakianism and Gonzaloism. So I just want to leave it there. These are just, I just want to label them. There's so much to get into with these ideas, but I think the audience can now know some of these revisionist trends, that we can at least start with an umbrella label that eventually can go into so many more specific, granular level ideas of why it's revisionist.
Yeah, and I think it'll be good for people who are watching this to check out the Politics in Command podcast, because there's a science of Marxism episode dropping tomorrow. And there's a mini series planned on the topic of revisionism, which I'm very excited about, to actually go much deeper into these questions and these trends. We've been able to provide some type of overview today. We started really defining revisionism. We started after the definition of revisionism to go into some of these historical trends. Some of the original revisionist ideas of Bernstein and evolutionary socialism, class struggle continuing in the Soviet Union and the inter-party bourgeoisie with Khrushchev, Liu Shaoqi, and Deng Xiaoping, and the different class ideas operative there, with class struggle continuing under socialism and sharpening, while making some links really to, okay, how does analyzing that help us right now in the current state by looking at the different class ideas that are being put forward, and how the bourgeoisie is helping to proliferate revisionism today, and also some modern day examples with Prachanda and the capitulation in Nepal, with a brief overview of different revisionist trends currently today. But that being said, I hope everybody enjoyed that. And again, if you are like, okay, that was good, little taste, I like it, but I need more. It's a pretty brief overview. Definitely check out Politics in Command and all the different episodes that are going to come out, as well as the Instagram. They'll be posting stuff on there regularly. So with that being said, I think it will be good to look at a couple of questions and see if we can provide some answers. So Gabe has commented, I mean this with no ill will, but you claim to be for scientific socialism, yet you renounce any developments of Marxism as revisionism. Why can't actually existing socialism adapt to the conditions of today? Thank you for your question, Gabe. And yeah, for people who are really grappling with this kind of stuff, of like, okay, well, there's a lot of countries and states that are claiming that they're socialist right now. Shouldn't Marxism always be developing? It's a living and breathing science. Shouldn't we be developing Marxism to really match up with the conditions of today? It's a good question, and it's very important to really look at that. So the first thing, what is actually existing socialism? Well, this commonly refers to a set of different countries, which can include China, Cuba, Vietnam, Korea, sometimes Laos is placed in there. Sometimes China isn't included there. But basically, just a host of, as a response to people like me, we're saying right now there aren't any existing socialist countries. Be like, well, there are actually existing socialist countries. So actually existing socialism refers to that. So it is true that we are here defending scientific socialism, and by defending scientific socialism, we need to apply the principles of socialism to currently existing countries. And so thereby, first we need to defend and look at what socialism actually is, it being a transitional period between capitalism and communism, when or even from after Chinese Revolution, for example, we had a new democratic period where there was semi-feudalism, semi-colonialism was won over, and then in 56 really fully launching the socialist period, it being a transition period really between capitalism and communism. So when something is a transition, we can go into two different directions. So in this case, we can take the capitalist road back to capitalism, or we can take the socialist road to continue and deepen the transition towards communism. So how do we really assess that? It's a question of assessment of what road a country and a communist party leading in a country is taking, which is a good question to ask. And so then we need to see, okay, are these developments because the Cultural Revolution was a development? It was an actual development of Marxism. So taking China as an example. So there was a development in Marxism where it was much more fully fleshed out. The theory of the inner party bourgeoisie, where's this bourgeoisie coming from? Who are the capitalist roaders really representing? But also, what do we do about it? Because in the case of the Cultural Revolution, Mao and other leading communists had been trying to think, okay, how do we keep China on this path to communism? They tried many different things. The Let 100 Flowers Bloom campaign. It's like, okay, everybody just air grievances. And that's actually where the big character posters came from. Because it was a lot of the rightists really were actually the ones putting up these big character posters, letting 100 flowers bloom, 100 schools of thought contend, to really air out, okay, what do we need to do to keep China on this revolutionary path? And a lot of people really advocating for capitalist logic there. In developing China, or really that the party, for example, shouldn't have so much of a hold onto society and really determining the correct path forward, or even in terms of arts and culture, that really the party shouldn't have any say about arts and culture. That then developing into the anti-rightist movement. Okay, now we have all these rightists really operating fully, airing their thoughts. Now we should combat these ideas that actually no, the party should have a hand and say in the development of arts and culture. If not, then not only capitalist ideas, but even feudal ideas are going to proliferate. We have the power for feudalism thousands of years. And in terms of capitalist ideas, we have capitalism being operative in most part of the world, and there's still being a bourgeoisie in society. These ideas are going to come out in arts and culture. So this anti-rightist campaign being a real campaign to, okay, these ideas are out, now we're going to combat them. Then we have the Great Leap Forward, socialist education movement, basically all these different attempts really to keep China on the socialist road. Then in the Cultural Revolution, we have the masses really rising up and training themselves through struggle to analyze who are the capitalist roaders, and for a period of time to seize power. Slogan was seize power from these capitalist roaders, bombard the headquarters, to have the masses play a much bigger and important role in this revolutionary process, and thereby really discovering and theorizing the inter-party bourgeoisie, but also the question of mass supervision through semi-independent mass organizations, not fully dependent. Party should still be in command. Okay, so here we have a case where we have a socialist transition, and we have really new developments being made through the Cultural Revolution, and that's applying Marxism under socialism. So then we need to look at after 76. Well, was this a development? China actually existing socialism. Were the developments that happened in China, because there were developments, were they going towards communism, or were they going towards capitalism? And I'm going to try to infuse something else, which was brought up kind of as a side point, Nixon's visit. So if we look at Nixon's visit, there's a couple of things there. So on the one hand, there was a mistaken assessment really in terms of the balance of power in the world, especially in terms of what was deemed third world countries, and it's kind of equating these national liberation struggles with socialist struggles, but also to give too much support really to different kind of third world anti-imperialist countries and really the socialist movements in their respective countries. But also we have to look at this time and see that the Soviet Union was threatening to nuke China. So seeing the Soviet in 1969, so seeing the Soviet Union as a real threat to the existence of China, and the real need to clarify to different countries in some kind of anti-imperialist front that China was building, the real need to also ally against the Soviet Union, that getting some movements into a bind where, okay, but the US is also combating the Soviet Union here. And again, there being some misassessments there in giving overdue credence to some of these countries that were deemed third world countries. But the overall analysis was correct, which is the need to combat both Soviet social imperialism, but also US imperialism. So when we contextualize the 1972 Nixon visit into this, and Mao shaking Nixon's hand and Kissinger's hand, and everybody who's heard my song Henry's in Hell knows that clearly I'm not a fan of Henry Kissinger. But if we look at the different things that were laid in front of Nixon, was really that there was a push to integrate Taiwan into China, but also to get the U.S. out of Vietnam, and that it was clearly stated that in order for there to be actual normalization with the U.S. troops needed to get out of Vietnam. And we see the same thing in the Philippines, with Mao in the Philippines, that as relations were normalized in the Philippines, there was an increased uptick in material support for the CPP. So we need to really look at one, okay, well, what were the actual mistakes of the assessment? What were the roots of these mistakes? But do these then represent a shift in the road and shift in the fundamental orientation to revolution? Or were these mistakes made while still maintaining these mistakes, not veering us off into a different road? With all that broken down, and I kind of took the Nixon question as a side question into, okay, so how do we then assess China's development post 76? And wasn't this, much like the Cultural Revolution, just the continuation of the development of Marxism? That, okay, well, actually, immediately we have to say no, because if we take the inner party bourgeoisie as a real development of Marxism, then we can't say that what China did afterwards was a development of Marxism. It's a real, that would be a logical contradiction, because if we understand the development of the inner party bourgeoisie as a development within Marxism, well, then we can't say that after the capitalist roaders actually took over, that that was a genuine development. A common argument that's made in favor of really the coup of Deng Xiaoping and the taking over of capitalist roaders is that there were fundamental political and economic problems in China at the time that really warranted such a move, which is kind of, most other arguments are ridiculous. And this one, under closer examination, is true, because what you have in the Cultural Revolution, the first couple of years, we have a decrease in economic output, but then in the second half, we have a strong increase in economic output. We also don't just have a normalized relationship with the US. That also doesn't happen in the second part of the Cultural Revolution. That really happens under Deng Xiaoping, actually. So even with the further developments within China, the further economic developments, the further political developments, there really wasn't a need to break down the communes, which were doing well, but to also break down the Ein Rice Bowl, to really set the working class up to be able to wage struggles against the capitalist roaders, but also on the factory level against bosses and managers, to unduly increase their power and to take the capitalist road by focusing a lot of material incentives and bonuses, to take that away from the working class was really a way to continue to take away their power. So then we need to ask, well, why and how is that a development of Marxism? To just say, well, we just need to develop the productive forces. Well, the productive forces were being developed fine under the second half of the Cultural Revolution. And if we look at Xi Jinping right now in this theory of a harmonious society, which is basically advocating for class harmony, how does that develop Marxism? Because it's clear to see with the inner party bourgeoisie and focusing on some political problems of how do we deal with the rising bourgeoisie in the party, we can see what the issue is and what answers are being provided. A harmonious society, developing the productive forces to 2050 through the development of a harmonious society. Through the continual breaking up of the completion, really, of breaking up any collectivization of agriculture, the continued development of capitalist socialist relations, or really the completion of that as well, in the cities and on the countryside. What are the actual developments of Marxism there? And how does that historically advance two things? One, the road to revolution for especially imperialist countries, and understanding for us how to make revolution, but also how does it develop Marxism in terms of waging the class struggle under socialism. So I'm seeing that while I've been talking, over 40 new comments. So there's a lot there, but I will leave it at this. And also see if, Jay, if you have anything to add. And if not, if there's any other particular question, maybe a last question that you would like to tackle before we finish out this live stream.
Yeah. No, I think that was well put, the way you made all of these points. So I really appreciate it. It was great listening to you spell all these points out. I just want to kind of not add anything, but reinforce and add an approach to understanding one of the points you made is going back to Mao and really foreign policy, dealing with the threat of nuclear attack from the Soviet Union, which is insane. But also dealing with U.S. imperialism, dealing with the bourgeois headquarters within the Communist Party and throughout society, trying to defend the proletarian headquarters within the party. I mean, there's a lot going on here in the 60s and 70s, and the Cultural Revolution taking on. I mean, it's a lot. So I think we shouldn't steer away from trying to find mistakes that were made or the correct ideas that were put forward. We should be objective about all this, but I also want to steer away from being somewhat arrogant, which I think a lot of people can do when just going on online forums and typing in comments and being like, oh, well, it would have been easy to make this decision here or there and whatever. That is an incredibly intense situation that I cannot even really fathom I mean, I can somewhat imagine the pressure, but there's no way I would really understand the pressure of making correct decisions in those conditions, being threatened by, again, nuclear attack, understanding the rise of U.S. imperialism, the Cultural Revolution happening. I mean, that is a lot. And not only to come to correct ideas, but to do it under that immense pressure. That is something that I think if we're serious about making revolution, it's something that we're going to have to learn to deal with. I mean, Lenin talks specifically about stealing and ironing our cadre, the communists and the communist movement and the revolutionary movement overall, to deal with these situations that are going to inevitably come up. Any socialist revolution that develops socialism in one country is going to face the threat of some type of imperialism, and that's a serious thing to measure. So I say that to try to help define our overall orientation and approach to trying to objectively and scientifically analyze these situations, these historical periods, but also not to steer us away from being critical, having a critical approach, just trying to be steering away from this very American exceptionalist, like arrogant view that has developed in the US left overall, and just to be more objective about it. So that's all I really wanted to add. Again, the points that you made were really great. So I think maybe I'm down to answer maybe one more question. I don't know how you're feeling.
Let's do it. You can pick. There's so many. And it'll be great to hear your thoughts before we close out.
I did notice one. That's a really good practical question. I mean, there's obviously a political nature to answering these questions and trying to accomplish certain goals and tasks practically. But I think it's something about us. It says, you guys listed these modern examples of revisionism, mostly in the US, but how would you suggest interacting with these groups and the people being swept up in them? This is a really good practical question. Again, going back to the first thing that I said in the live stream, I think we should avoid this approach of being like, oh, you disagree with me, therefore you're a revisionist, and down with the revisionist, you're counter-revolutionary. I mean, good luck. Good luck with that approach. You're just going to corner yourself off in some like dark corner in the US and not really win anybody over or build anything. But we also shouldn't compromise on our principles and the correct ideas and this already established concepts and principles within the scientific theory of Marxism, right? So I think it's a good division to think about going into these groups and social circles and asking the question, well, who is consolidated? who is consolidated to these revisionist trends and who is not so consolidated or unconsolidated to these revisionist ideas. Generally, this isn't always the case, but it's a general rule of thumb that in revisionist organizations, there are the leaders, the theoretical leaders, even leaders in the structures of the organization that are usually consolidated to this revisionist trend. And there's tends to be less of a possibility or opportunity to win them over to an anti-revisionist trend, and that is Maoism. So, but within the organization, there are many members throughout, all kinds of members with all kinds of ideas. So how can we find some that are less consolidated or even unconsolidated to that idea? I mean, listen, we're talking about PSL earlier. PSL has all kinds of members, especially ones who have just joined because that's the only thing they really know. They might know of DSA and PSL and they wanted to try to get into something more serious. So they're like, all right, I'm going to join PSL and do this. You know, are we just going to approach them and call them a counter-revolutionary and belittle them publicly, directly? I mean, that's going to turn them away. How can we approach a situation like this where, one, we're trying to parse through and figure out who are the ones that are most receptive to anti-revisionist ideas? And what are the ways we can throw those ideas out for them to listen, to discuss, to engage with, build a relationship with, and overall win them over to MLM? I mean, the particular conditions are going to really influence how we approach all of these things. There's some overall general principles and orientations we can take, and one of them being understanding who's consolidated, who's unconsolidated. But we really need to steer from this arrogant and ultimately dogmatic approach of saying everyone in PSL is a revisionist, so screw all of them. We really need to integrate ourselves with the whole Marxist milieu, all organizations, find the people most interested in finding the most correct ideas towards achieving socialism, and then figure out ways, methods, tactics to engage with them and eventually win them over to MLM. So I think that's the one and main thing I'll say here on this question.
Yeah, and it's important to struggle with people who are actually willing to struggle, and I find that quickly in conversation, you can see who's really up for a political struggle and to really take somebody else's political ideas into consideration, but also that your own approach is really important in that, and that again, it's just very important to break down different ideas that people hold and why they're incorrect, but also to show in practice the better approach to take there. But that being said, we are coming up on the 2-hour mark. I'm very excited.
Wow.
I know, it's gone so fast. And the comment section has been really lively. I know that there's so much that we didn't get to, but appreciate everybody sharing different thoughts. Some small struggles playing out in the comments. Great. And also for people putting forward a lot of different questions. And it's always only so many questions that we're able to take, but we're very grateful for everybody putting their different ideas forward. I am very excited for the new Politics and Command Science episode to come out tomorrow. What time does it drop, Jay? So I can set my alarm.
Yeah, let's try to have a back and forth so we can end exactly at 2:00. But tomorrow morning is going to be the launch of season 3 of Politics and Command podcast, starting with, in case you didn't hear it earlier, an episode titled Understanding Science and Marxism, which is the first episode of a longer mini-series that is titled The Foundations of MLM. Excited to drop that. Please follow on Instagram. Instagram, you can find all the links to listening to these episodes. And just very excited to drop that and start the 2025 year strong. Again, putting science back into the science of revolution.
What time does the episode drop, though?
Question mark. It's going to be tomorrow morning.
I was going to set my alarm because if you're dropping it January 1st, 1 past 12, I'll cancel my plans, my party plans. So
No, it's not going to be anything like that. It's going to be tomorrow morning, according to Eastern time, somewhat relatively in the morning.
Okay. So whenever different comments wake up, go check that out. Might be a little groggy, or you might be sharp and disciplined starting off the new year, right? And
Many workers going to work, and I want to
That's
have that
true.
podcast ready for them to listen to on
Very
their way
true.
to start that year off strong.
That's right. So we really want to encourage everybody to develop themselves all around politically, which also means theoretically for the new year. And we had Marxism today. Of course, we're going to play our part. We're going to continue with these live streams. We have a new Fred Eng's video coming up, a lot of other videos coming up, and also a live stream with Paul will be coming up too.
Ooh. The world has been waiting.
Yes, we know. All right, comrades. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and catch you out the next one.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Space. Have a good New Year's Eve.